War II grew into a long, intense war, but when the Germans surrendered to the Allies, it seemed that the war would soon be ending. Despite this, though, the war continued for another 4 months. Japan did not give up as easily as the Germans and continued to fight strongly against the United States forces. It was during this time period that President Truman decided that desperate measures needed to be taken in order to ensure that Japan would lose the war. The decision was to use a weapon more powerful than the world had ever seen. It was during this time period of World War II that people first began talking about the controversial issue of nuclear weapons. It is something that involves everyone, as it has the potential to affect anyone in the world. Over the years, there have been many different arguments on the reasons why nuclear weapons are damaging to society. While there are many reasons to be against nuclear weapons, the most notable ones are the environmental and climatic consequences, the humanitarian consequences, and the instability and supposed deterrence of these weapons. Nuclear weapons have devastating effects not only on the environment, but also on humanity, which is only complicated by the instability of the weapons themselves. The use of nuclear weapons has an immense effect on both the environment and the climate. In the article, The Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear War, Ira Helfland uses a study done by climatologist Alan Roback and professor of atmospheric and oceanic sciences Brian Toon to reveal the possible consequences of a nuclear war. In the study, they use the scenario of a potential limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan. The weapons involved represent only 0.5% of the world's nuclear arsenals. In the study, they discovered that the local effects would be devastating. Ira Helfland states, within the first week, over 20 million people would die from burns, blast effects, and radiation exposure. They also discovered that the nuclear weapons would cause firestorms, which would loft around 5 million tons of black soot high into the atmosphere. This would block out the sun, causing surface temperatures across the planet to drop to around 1.3 degrees Celsius. This would cause growing seasons to be shortened in areas where most of the world's grain is produced, and it would also cause precipitation patterns to change. Furthermore, the soot particles would decrease the major stratospheric ozone because of the high temperatures in the upper atmosphere. With the decrease in ozone, there would be more ultraviolet light that would be able to reach the Earth's surface, which would cause the crop yields to be further reduced. Also, since the soot particles were launched so high into the atmosphere, they would not be able to be washed out by rain, and so the effects would persist for a full decade. As well as the environment and climate, the consequences of nuclear weapons extends to the humanitarian side of things as well. The effects it has on its victims is devastating. The effects of nuclear weapons happen instantly after the bombs are dropped. Immediately after, the people closest are instantly vaporized, with only their shadow burnt into stone as the remains. Those not vaporized are killed by burn and heat blasts, and the immediate death rate will be over 90%. The death rate will be higher than in normal disasters, as the emergency services will be unable to respond due to their equipment being destroyed and their staff killed. The best that anyone can hope for is that the near immediate survivors die in as little pain as possible. And as you can see by this graph, in the blast, those that are 0.5 kilometers from it and that are covered are still 60%, have a 60% death rate. And those that are exposed have a 93.7% death rate. The effects not only happen immediately after the bombs are dropped, but also days and even many years later. Within days, survivors begin to feel symptoms such as hair loss, bleeding from the mouth and gums, internal bleeding, hemorrhagic diarrhea, gangrenous ulcers, vomiting, fever, delirium, and terminal coma. Those lucky enough to survive past this won't feel the effects until 20 years later. Those people will develop various types of cancers. Besides the health of people, the production of food is also affected. Climatologists Michael Mills and Andrea Stenke did a study using the scenario of a potential nuclear war in South Asia to discover how the disruption of climate caused by nuclear weapons would affect the production of food. They discovered that there would be a 7% decline in soybeans and a 12% decline in corn in the United States Corn Belt a decade after the limited war scenario. According to Healthland, even with the world grain reserves, it would not be able to offer a significant buffer against the sharp and sustained reduction in grain harvest, as they only amount to less than 70 days of consumption. Therefore, as the study concluded, more than 1 billion people might die of starvation as a result of the limited war scenario. The last point that needs to be made about nuclear weapons is their deterrence factor and their instability. The ability to deter enemies and play a major role in stability is perhaps the best and only argument that can be made in support of nuclear weapons. It has been claimed that nuclear weapons are needed to discourage enemies from nuclear attack. Due to the risk of retaliation, nuclear weapons make the consequences much greater than the reward. Nuclear weapons discourage countries from who would deliberately attack. According to Jaffe and Davis, the stability is produced with the knowledge that According to Jaffe and Davis, stability is produced with the knowledge that no nuclear power can use its weapons against another without provoking its own demise. This stability has maintained the peace that the world has seen since 1945. However, were this peace to come to an end and conflicts begin, the countries would be able to stop it from escalating to a higher level with the aid of nuclear weapons. On the other hand, it can be argued that nuclear weapons are unstable and that they in fact do not deter enemies. The claim that they deter enemies lacks both nuance and evidence. There is no historical evidence that supports this claim. There is no historical evidence that supports this claim. And actually there have been several attacks against various countries despite their nuclear status. In actuality, terrorists do not even fear the loss of life, so nuclear threat would do nothing to affect their decisions. Large arsenals of nuclear weapons are the cause for instability rather than the prevention. The very existence of these weapons leaves open the possibility that a nuclear exchange could happen, even unintentionally. For example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. and USSR nearly blundered into a nuclear war. Also, during the Cold War, there were several false alarms that nearly led to a nuclear war that could have caused global devastation. Another thing is that the increase of weapons with the increase of weapons, the danger of them falling into the hands of the enemy also increases, where they could be used against the very people who own them in the first place. According to Beatrice Finn, a study editor, maintaining nuclear weapons isn't a symbol of strength and power, but instead a constant reminder of the immense suffering they have caused and continuously threaten to cause again. Nuclear weapons reach out their damaging effects to harm both the world and all the innocent people living in it. Over the years, there have been extensive arguments on the use of nuclear weapons. However, nothing hits home more than learning about the horrifying effects on the environment you live in now, the alarming impact on a person's health, and the considerable risk of using nuclear weapons as a deterrent. In the words of John F. Kennedy, every man, woman, and child lives under the nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident, miscalculation, or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us. Thank you for listening.